Hello and welcome to Unrecognised Heroes, the official podcast brought to you by the National AI and Cyber Awards. This is the podcast where we dive into the latest innovations, challenges and success stories in the world of cybersecurity. I'm your host Ellie from Future Tech Events, and we're here today with CEO and founder of the Cyber Helpline, Rory Innes. Welcome to the podcast, Rory.
Hello, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for coming on today. It's great to have you. I know that we've been associated for a number of years with the National Cyber Awards with your numerous wins, which we'll touch on later. But to dive in, I suppose, after winning multiple awards last year, for people that might not be familiar with the Cyber Helpline, can you tell us a little bit about what you do and the charity's mission?
Yeah, of course. And I guess the really important starting point is that not enough is being done to support victims of cybercrime and online harm. If you're an individual and you face digital fraud, you are cyber attacked, you're being cyber stalked, there just isn't enough expert help for people. And so the Cyber Helpline is a mobilisation of the cybersecurity industry to step in and help fill some of that gap. So we take volunteer cybersecurity experts, we vet them, we train them up, and we connect them with victims, so members of the public, who need that expert help to recover. And so the great thing about the Cyber Helpline is it's a charity doing loads of good work, but it's really this industry coming together to help solve that problem and use their skills and experience.
I love that as a mission, Rory. I think that's so vital and important. But something you just said there makes me wonder, why is it that there isn't enough help out there and support for an industry that's, well, for a world that's rapidly evolving in the digital space? Why do you think that is?
Yeah, the stats are really sad and disappointing. If you look at England and Wales alone, there are 5 million victims every year, and 1.7 million report to the police, but only less than 2%, so 98% get no further action from the police. So less than 2% go on to see their perpetrator charged or summoned. And that is really about a lack of modernisation of how we police modern crime. It's about a lack of funding for the police and the justice system, and just the lack of keeping pace with online services, with online technologies. And so quite often cyber criminals are not doing anything particularly technical, they're not doing anything particularly amazing, but they're able to use technology and get away with a high volume or really impactful crimes. And that doesn't seem to be changing anytime soon. And so I think the work of the Cyber Helpline and helping fill that gap and using those technical skills to remove technology being a barrier to justice is going to be important work for years to come.
Yeah, absolutely. That's an incredibly stark statistic as well, isn't it? 2%. It's amazing, really.
Yeah, it is. And it's not just that individuals lose money. And so we're not just talking about people, going to the police because they've had some money stolen. These are people who have often had their lives ripped apart by online harassment, by cyber stalking, the impact on their mental health, on their online confidence. And so these are really impactful, stressful situations. And so that lack of help and that lack of a route to justice makes that impact much worse. And it essentially lets perpetrators get away scot-free.
And if that statistic is, a public statistic, it's showing them that, isn't it? Only 2% of people will see who their perpetrator is or find that out. And it's scary, really. Scary.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's also a really interesting point in that a lot of the individuals that we work with, they don't actually know who the perpetrator is. Because that individual is anonymous online, they're either a cyber criminal or they're somebody they know, but they're hiding behind a fake profile or a range of fake profiles. That also adds to the kind of mental health load, the complexity. You know, do you how do you assess the risk of a stalker if you don't know where they are or who they are? And so a big part of our service is trying to collect that evidence of who is this individual, what's the risk, and how can we deal with the online elements of these crimes.
That's an incredibly interesting and large task you've got on your hands, Rory, and I'd love to dive into that a little bit more. But I'm interested in you and how this came about in the first place for you to found the Cyber Helpline. And what's your background in the industry? How did you get here?
Yeah, so I kind of fell into the information security, cybersecurity industry by mistake, really. And through the chance of getting a student placement at university, got a role, a placement in a cybersecurity firm based in Edinburgh. Was offered a job once I left university and worked in that organisation called DNS for a long time. And it just grew incredibly quickly because it was that time of kind of 2004, 2005, the internet really taking off in business, security becoming a big issue. And over the years was acquired a number of times until I ended up in Dell. And all in that kind of corporate cybersecurity space. So looking after, banks and retailers and other big corporate organizations. But what kept happening through my career is that individuals would come and ask us for help. And we would say, we're a cybersecurity business aimed at other businesses. So we can't really help you. If you go to the police, they'll help. And so we'd send them off, they'd go and report to the police. And then a week later, a month later, they would come back and say, we haven't heard anything, what do we do? And it was really interesting because I kind of sat back and thought, this can't be right. There must be services and people out there helping individuals, not just businesses. And it was 2016 and the National Cybersecurity Centre released their first strategy for the UK cybersecurity strategy. And I downloaded it and I remember it now. It was an 88-page document. And I thought, okay, there'll be something in here that outlines how we're going to protect individuals online. And I read the document and there is pretty much one sentence which focuses on individuals.
Wow.
And it essentially says individuals must take personal responsibility for their own cybersecurity. And I just sat there and thought, this is absolute madness. We are building the National Cybersecurity Centre, we're going to protect the UK, we're going to make it the safest place to be online, but we're not going to help people. We're only going to focus on business. And so that was the point where I thought, cybersecurity people are good people. They do lots of volunteering, they support lots of good causes. We need a cause that helps solve this problem. And that was the kind of founding idea behind the Cyber Helpline.
I guess that was the moment coming from those corporate environments for you to say change needs to happen, and it takes someone really special, I think, to say, right, that's going to be me and I'm going to do this. And has that changed, Rory, do you think, from that 2016 report to present day? Has that changed much in how we help personal users over businesses?
No, I don't think it has. I think if you look at, the scope of the National Cybersecurity Centre, which does great work and has loads of great people in it, their focus is not individuals and helping individuals who've become victims. That's very much the kind of remit of the police. And I think that the police have really struggled because of the volume, the technical nature of the crimes and a lack of funding in that space. And we've had some kind of false starts. So the National Fraud Strategy, which was released a year or two ago by Suella Braverman, had these big aims of reducing fraud and doing that work, but has kind of just slowly been forgotten about and nothing has really happened as far as we can see. So I think there is this frustration from us and lots of other organisations in this space that we kind of let individual victims experience these crimes, we give them a crime number, and then we forget about them. And I don't think that is going to change anytime soon. I think there have been developments though, there have been some positives. So if you look at the Online Safety Act and Ofcom becoming the regulator of online harm, while that's really early and there's lots more work to do there, at least now we have some regulation and some law there. We have a regulator, and we are trying to look at how we make the internet safer. Um, doesn't necessarily help when someone does become a victim, but anything that means less victims is obviously a welcome development in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you've touched on earlier in the episode, cybercrime can be extremely distressing for those victims. And I wonder, Rory, is there any stories that stick out from any people you've been speaking with around, case studies of victims and the way that your impact at the charity is helping them?
Yeah, and I think this has been the biggest learning in my 8 years at the Cyber Helpline. When I started this and we started putting it together, we kind of prepared for all of these really technical crimes and technical issues. We also realized people were losing money, and that was an important part of where the service might be needed. But we didn't really understand the nature of cybercrime and how it impacts people's lives. And what I will say is that most of the work that we do is human behavior wrapped up in technology. It, it's a breakup that leads to cyber stalking. It's a domestic abuse situation or coercive control in a relationship. It's people bullying each other and it's spilling out onto the internet. And so there's these really complex human issues where the technology is involved and is a component of the overall issue where we're increasingly involved. And about half of what we do is fraud and scams. And those can be really impactful too, because some of those scams are recording you performing a sex act online and then threatening to share it if you don't give that person money within a certain number of hours. About a third of what we do is cyber stalking and online harassment, which is obviously really impactful. And the rest are more technical kind of cyber crimes. But I guess two stories that kind of paint a picture of what it's like. One is a romance scam that led to an investment scam. And this was a retired guy who had lost his wife 6 months before. Somebody had just phoned him up and built a relationship with him over the phone. That led over time to software, remote desktop software being downloaded onto his devices, control of his email accounts, and this kind of investment opportunity. So targeting a vulnerable, lonely man, and over the course of months and months, getting his trust. But it got to a point where that individual had lost, £70,000. Some of that money had been loans that had been taken out to help fund this activity, and it was actually one of his children that had contacted us, because not only were they worried that he'd lost all of the money that he had, but that she was really worried about him in terms of his mental health, because he'd lost everything, he'd been tricked. He felt obviously devastated, but also felt lost for the relationship that had been built. And so over the course of a month or two, not only did we eventually help them recover all of the money through working with the bank and the ombudsman, but we also cleaned up his devices and made sure they were secure again and he could use them. But we also talked him through, look, this happens, and it happens to lots of other people, and it happens to lots of other people just like him. And we were able to connect him with some other victims, and they could talk about their experiences, and really helped him kind of come to terms with what had happened and moved on. And so, that's a really impactful situation for that family where actually there is a positive outcome. On the other side, you see these cases like cyber stalking, and I've worked lots of cyber stalking cases now, and they are really hard because often you don't know where the stalker is.
Mm.
Often evidence might suggest that they are somewhere else outside of the police jurisdiction, so they're outside of the UK. And so you're kind of going to the police and saying, look, we need to do something here. And they're kind of saying, well, this person looks like they're in America, what can we really do? But this person is scared for their life when they're not able to live their day-to-day life anymore. You know, they're not doing the school run with their kids because they're worried that the stalker could be anyone. And so what's important, I guess, for anyone listening to understand is that this isn't about, someone changing, your settings in your Facebook account. It's not just about losing money. This is about taking control of someone's life and someone living in fear because of how technology is being used against them. So they're really impactful, really stressful crimes that have a huge impact on the people we help.
Oh gosh, I mean, just listening to those, you can see how complex some of those issues are because, like you say, if you don't have the support that much of the police's resource, then you're grappling with these hard hitting cases, and it's nice that on the other hand you have some good outcomes from them, but like you say, the mental health impact is huge, and again the resource in that space is lacking, and so the work that you're doing is really helpful, but where else do people go?
Yeah, and it's a perfect storm in a way because, then there are great police officers out there and there are some good forces doing good work in this space, but they're underfunded and we haven't modernized the police. Mental health services are hugely under strain. The Ministry of Justice have just cut the victims' budget by roughly 5%. So all victim services, frontline services, are losing money and losing funding at the same time that national insurance bills are increasing. And so every single charity frontline service in this space is under huge pressure. And so at the same time that this is roughly 60% of crime and it is growing rapidly. And so, you know, how do we get to a place where we have good outcomes? We need radical change in this space and a change in investment in this space so we can properly support victims and get good outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm guessing, Rory, through a lot of these cases, you're having to work directly with the police force to support with that.
Yeah, and I think it's really hard too if you put yourself in a police officer's shoes. And a lot of the police officers, when there is some sort of police engagement and somebody that does speak to the victim, you're a police officer who, you're not technical, you're not a cybersecurity person. One minute you're, a stolen car to a fight outside of a nightclub, and then you've got somebody describing a complex cybercrime to you. That's actually really, really hard. And how do you get that victim to the right place with the right skills? And we have a victims code, and the victims code says that you have the right to understand and to be understood. And I would argue really heavily that are victims being understood if they are not speaking to somebody who understands technology and understands their type of crime? And so we've got a long way to go to get to a point where victims are understood and can get access to that justice and can get access to that right help really quickly.
Absolutely. What are the kind of common trends you're seeing with cases at the moment, Rory? Would you say that they are largely the same as what you were seeing a few years ago? Have they evolved since then? Or what are you seeing?
Yeah, it's definitely changed, and there's definitely some common areas. And if you think about the common areas first, hacked social media accounts, hacked email accounts, really common, really high volume, and they sound like things that are relatively low impact, but actually once someone's got your Facebook account, your Instagram account, and you can't get it back, not only is your network at risk, all the people who they can message, but also all of the content that you've got on those platforms, some of it can be really personal, all of a sudden is in the hands of a criminal. Same with email accounts. Think of all the information in your email account. Think of all the accounts where you reset your passwords back to your email account. It just gives people lots of access to your online life. But we've also seen a real common kind of strand over the last 8 years of cyber stalking and online harassment. One of our first cases was someone being cyber stalked, and we've had to do a lot of work over the years to understand and build out how you help someone who's being cyberstalked, how you keep them safe. Because the natural thing for a cybersecurity expert to do is say, okay, well, someone's tracking you, someone's got access to your accounts, let's remove all of that access and give you your privacy back. The problem is, if someone's obsessed with you and you cut off their access to their accounts, they might do something much more risky. They might start turning up at their workplace, at their home. And so you've really got to think about the safety of that individual. But there have been changes in what we've seen, absolutely, over the 8 years. We've seen sextortion rise really quickly, things like revenge porn rise really quickly. And we've also seen the use of kind of AI over the last year much more heavily. And some of that is just, to be caught up in a sextortion scam, historically, you had to answer a video call and you had to actively do something that was going to be recorded. Now you just need a face on a social media profile and they can create that video and start to make it look like you have taken that action. And also just the maturity that AI has brought to the quality of social engineering attacks, and the cost of spinning up fake websites and being able to code those really quickly. So I think that the vulnerabilities are the same, but the way and the technology being used to attack individuals has definitely changed over the 8 years.
Would you say that the communities particularly targeted, Rory, have remained the same? I know that in the past people have talked about the elderly and the very young being most vulnerable. Has that kind of stayed the same, or has that evolved?
I think that's evolved hugely, actually. And I think most people listening to this will think it's either children in school, kind of cyber harassing and bullying each other, or they will think of retired people being caught up in scams. And that is just absolutely not the case of the people we help right now. And we do help those two groups, but I would say that our typical user is somewhere between 18 and 40. And it's pretty evenly split, male and female, actually. But each individual crime type has its own demographic. Cyber stalking is 80% women and girls. Sextortion is 80-90% men and boys. But generally, it's those people who live their lives online, who have kind of lots of technology, who are being targeted. But it's an absolute cross section. Everyone, every single demographic is represented in our user base.
That's incredibly interesting. Again, hearing those statistics that you have from the cases you work on, it's again that's stark reality, isn't it? That's the world we're living in now, and anybody is susceptible to being a victim of cybercrime.
Yeah, and absolutely, and that's why the advice that people often get, just come off social media, or just don't use your phone. And that advice to people when they're being cyberstalked, harassed, when they're being targeted, it's just unrealistic. People live their lives online now, and I think particularly people younger than me, their life and their identity is so embroiled in technology. And I think that also has an impact on trying to recover. Because if you say to a 16-year-old boy or girl, hey, we need the evidence from your phone, hand over your phone and you might get it back in 6 months, maybe a year, the chance of you handing over your phone, to the police and being without that phone for that length of time is unrealistic. So they'd rather move on and forget about the issue. So I think, it's really challenging. And I think as technology evolves more and more, it will just continually get more and more impactful for individuals when it goes wrong.
It's almost a societal issue rather than just a cyber related issue, isn't it? Because like you mentioned, people are so reliant on living their lives through a phone or through an Instagram account, but it's actually making that difference between what's real and what's not. It's quite interesting.
Absolutely. And I think the other really important thing here is that most of us across the UK have been a victim or have been targeted. The stats I think are either 1 in 5 or 1 in 10 individuals will be targeted with a fraud or scam or a fallen victim. The numbers are much bigger than that, I am sure. And so it's kind of one of these unspoken things, really. And because it's unspoken, and because not enough people report to the police, and because there's not enough resource to investigate these crimes, they're kind of the silent majority of people who have been a victim of some sort of online harm. And I think what we really need to do is this kind of societal moment of, actually, this is harming our children, this is harming us all as adults. We need to ask for more, and we need to ask for better from the people who are supposed to be protecting us online.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely that. To segue into something a little lighter, Rory, from that stark reality that's the world we're living in. Winning multiple national cyber awards last year and in the past is a huge achievement, so congratulations for that. What does that recognition mean to you and to your wider team at the Cyber Helpline? How does that affect you?
It actually means a huge amount. And I think it's hard to kind of understand how much it means to an organization like the Cyber Helpline or the individuals within it. And we've had, you know, Charity of the Year, kind of not for profit of the year awards, which have been amazing. But we've also had, our team members, our volunteers win awards like Student of the Year and others. And so what you've got to remember is it's really hard running a charity, and it's really hard, giving up your free time if you're a volunteer and, helping others and doing that consistently week to week. And if you also think that, as I said right at the start, this is about kind of mobilizing the industry to come out and provide that support. So actually, when the industry kind of turns around and recognizes you and recognizes what you're doing and the hard work you're putting in, it's it's a real boost for the team. And I think not only does it make everyone feel great and make them feel rewarded, of course, the individuals who win the individual awards, it's great for them and their development and their understanding of how good they are and what great work they're doing. But it also raises the profile of the charity, and it raises the profile of the mission. And you go to the awards and you've got all of these kind of government organizations, corporate cybersecurity organizations, academic organizations, and just the whole cross section of the industry. And it's really good to see the Cyber Helpline winning an award in front of that audience and getting that recognition. So it's a brilliant thing for us, and it's something we are genuinely really proud of.
You should be, absolutely. Are you a large team, Rory? How many of you are there at the Cyber Helpline?
So we are 150 volunteers and around 10 staff. And so all of our model is built around volunteering. We have a kind of staff layer to run the charity and do some key tasks, but it's almost all exclusively volunteers. So yeah, so around 150, and actually we have a waiting list of volunteers to join, which is somewhere between 50 and 80 people. And it's all just about having the funding to enable those volunteers to come on.
In terms of funding and resources, they're often a challenge for charities to get hold of. But how is the Cyber Helpline funded, and what support do you need to continue to grow?
Yeah, so the best answer to how is the Cyber Helpline funded is terribly. It's incredibly hard. And I didn't really understand this when I, founded the charity, that 99% of my job is begging and borrowing and asking for money, because it's really hard. And as we just talked about, a lot of the victims' budgets where you would traditionally go for money are being cut, and so it's getting harder and harder. But what's been brilliant has been the cybersecurity community. Not only have they mobilized to run the service, they've mobilized to fund the charity. So we have some corporate sponsors who provide us with money every year to help us keep the service running. We have cybersecurity teams out there doing fundraisers, doing a Tough Mudder, doing all sorts of different activity. And those can be really big organizations, but they can also be smaller organizations. Like Sapio Information Security who always run 2 or 3 fundraisers for us every year and raise really vital money for the charity. And so really it's a mix of cybersecurity organisations giving back through their CSR giving. It's about fundraising and then grants where we can get them that help us keep the charity running. But there's no doubt we need more money. And if we're going to keep funding more volunteers so we can help more victims, so we can have a bigger impact, and we're going to try and drive some change in this industry, so we're not just, dealing with the symptoms, we're actually trying to change the kind of root cause, then we are going to need more funding. So not only if someone's listening, could they donate, one off every month, they could fundraise with their teams, they could look at their organisations. Any amount of money helps us support more victims of cybercrime.
And how do people go about doing that, Rory? Is it visiting the Cyber Helpline website to make donations?
Yeah, absolutely. You can come to our website and you can set up a donation there. We have a Just Giving page. If you're thinking about doing a fundraiser, you can, create your own fundraising page, or come and talk to us, because often, our team want to take part. We've got some tools and teams who can help communicate and can help come up with ideas for fundraisers. So always happy to explore those things as well.
That's excellent. That's great. And looking ahead for the future, what are your plans for the Cyber Helpline? And have you got any new initiatives or partnerships going on in the next few years?
Yeah, the big focus for the Cyber Helpline is 2 or 3 things. So it's one, how do we grow? How do we scale? And how do we help many more victims? We open around 2,000 cases a month. We have around 40,000 people coming to our self-help service every month on the website. But that is for us a lot of volume and hard for us to keep up with. But it's still a small percentage of the overall members of the general public who need our help. So how do we scale? And that's a lot of that is going to be funding. The second part is how do we scale safely? And so we can't just keep doubling in size. We need to mature the organization. We need to make sure we've got all the processes in place, the maturity, so that we can keep our volunteers safe, we can keep the victims safe, and we're collecting all the right data and doing all the right things in terms of safeguarding. But I think the other big focus, and we always said when we started, we'll focus on supporting victims, and that will always be our core focus. But what we have collected over the last 8 years is a lot of data and a lot of insight into this space. Who are the victims? How do those crimes happen? What is the impact of those crimes? And I think what we're really starting to focus on over the next year or two will be how do we try and drive some systemic change in this space, so that one, there's less victims, but two, when someone does fall victim, they get much better support. And so I think those will be really big focus areas. And I think there will absolutely be big partnerships that come along. And one of the things that we are really looking for right now is that one organisation who can really get behind the mission and really help propel us forward, not just in terms of funding, but also just expertise and skills and resources that can help us mature the organisation. So yeah, I think it's hard for a charity because you don't want to say the next 3 years might be really exciting, because what you're essentially doing is helping victims of crime and you would rather not have to do it. But I think that what we will see over the next 2-3 years is the Cyber Helpline really grow and evolve and be in a position where it can be much more impactful in terms of number of victims and also how we help those victims and get them back on their feet.
Yeah, absolutely. And just listening to you talking today, Rory, I'm completely in awe of everything that you're doing and your colleagues are doing. I think it's fantastic, and like you say, systemic change is absolutely what's required, and to help not only you help the victims, but more broadly for people to understand how to not fall into being a victim of cybercrime, because it is an educational change that needs to happen, and we need more resource to be able to support people. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure hearing about everything that you're doing at the Cyber Helpline, and congratulations on your wins. The final takeaway that I always like to ask our guests. So, as we know and we've discussed today, cybersecurity is all about staying one step ahead of the threats. But if you could have one superpower in your role as CEO of the Cyber Helpline, what would that be and why?
One superpower. So I think this is going to sound like a very unexciting superpower,
Okay.
but it could be the most impactful thing in this space. And if I had the superpower to remove the apathy in this space, so I think that over the last 10, 20 years, as an industry, we've decided this is just too hard. There's too many victims, there's too many jurisdictional issues. How do you provide support to people at that scale and with that level of technical expertise, particularly with the shortage of cybersecurity experts? I think if I had the superpower to just wipe everyone's minds of those beliefs, remove all of that apathy that this is just too hard, and be able to get everyone to see the harm that is being done in this space, but also that what we really need are solutions, and we need to start walking forward and moving forward in this space. I think if I could just clean the slate and say, okay, 60% of crime is cybercrime, what are we going to do? And how are we going to restructure everything so that we can provide the right level of support? That's what I would do for sure.
I like that a lot. That's a very selfless superpower to pick, Rory.
Yeah, I mean, my other options are like robbing banks and, becoming prime minister, but, that's probably the best one for the charity, I think.
Enough, we've had the robbing banks one before. I think that's the answer to a lot of people's problem.
Yeah, especially in the charity sector, money would just make such a difference. But the reward is doing lots of good, and I'm sure more investment will come in this space and supporting more victims, which will be very welcome when it comes.
Absolutely, and we're all behind you because it's just an amazing mission and an amazing charity. You're doing great things. So, yeah, definitely in awe of you and your organisation. But that's a wrap on today's episode. And if you enjoyed this chat with Rory and I, then make sure to subscribe to our channel and to follow us on our socials. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you next time.